Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I am just going to step in it today. I'm just doing it because I don't really know how to avoid it for this next conversation we need to have. If you listen to this episode a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to have the benefit of the not fog of war. Things are going to have settled in the world, I hope, dramatically over the period of time. We're going to have clarity on things. But right now, we live in an age where the fog of war, the chaos of disinformation and stuff just happening so fast, almost as an attempt to sling crap against the wall so quickly that nobody knows what to do with it until the deed is already done. We live in that kind of moment right now. And it seems like in this moment right now, we're just getting wave after wave of intentional chaos, be it intentional medical chaos, intentional economic chaos, intentional political chaos, intentional military chaos, intentional cultural chaos. These things can be sorted through, but in the age of Twitter and Facebook and social media and everything happening now, it is really hard at times to have clarity in the moment, yet the demand for moral outrage and action in the moment is always present. And so if you're listening to this down the road from when I'm recording it, you're probably going to have a little different perspective than what you're going to hear from me or what you're going to hear me characterizing about the world and the conversation in this moment. I'll just have to ask for historical grace on that, because we all look a lot smarter about things that are happening right now 5 years from now than we do as they're happening right now. That said, as we have already discussed, whatever, a week and a half ago, as I'm recording this in real time, we are a couple weeks out from the attacks that Hamas carried out from Gaza into southern Israel in October of 2023. And it looks like the reality of those atrocities are holding up. There's been some goofball, maybe even AI augmented claims here and there to strengthen the argument and the passion of the moment from one side or the other. It feels like powerful people are trying to make skeptics of us all, or heck, maybe they're not even powerful people, but simple people just using the power of the internet and our own outrage and the urgency of having opinions right now, despite how uninformed they might be. It feels like all of that is being weaponized against us to make sure that there is always a crisis du jour, and that we are always very, very angry at someone and very, very afraid. And I'm troubled by how the world looks right now. These are very strange times. And in the midst of these strange times, there is an obvious expectation that Israel would retaliate against Hamas, a terrorist organization that ostensibly represents the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people in Gaza. And of course, Israel is going to retaliate. Now, I don't understand at this point in history, and maybe if you're listening in the future, it's all been sorted out and you know, but let me just put a flag in the ground right now and say, I don't understand why Hamas did the things they did. I suppose one explanation would be they're crazy, or they're angry, or they feel they've been oppressed for a very long time and it just boiled over. But it doesn't make sense to me strategically, shrewdly. I don't get how the moves that they made, the atrocities they carried out against civilians, atrocities that would garner massive sympathy worldwide. I just don't get what they thought they were going to get out of that. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm feeling that way a lot right now about the most outlandish moves that get made around the world militarily. I don't understand why Putin invaded Ukraine. I could put together 3, 4, 5 explanations that might sound competent, but I don't get it. I don't see how what he imagined would happen or how he imagined people would respond to that. I don't get the stuff that happened in Syria a few years ago with the atrocities that were carried out there. I don't understand what people are doing. I don't get it. What I do know is those atrocities happened despite little nuggets of misinformation that have floated about. Those atrocities happened, and Israel, as I record this, is in the process of responding. It's urban warfare. They've made ovations. They've made attempts as a government to tell people to get out. There aren't really a lot of places for Palestinians in Gaza to go because other Arab nations, other Muslim countries aren't accepting anyone from there. At least at the time I'm recording this, that is true. Yesterday, the president of Jordan, or I guess they say the king of Jordan, he said, no, we're not taking any Palestinian refugees. So that's not happening. Egypt has its border buttoned up tight. They're not accepting any refugees. It doesn't make sense. I don't get what's going on exactly here. But I understand why Israel is retaliating, and I understand why they wouldn't want that on their doorstep and wouldn't want that to happen again. So right now, there is a debate, and forgive me for how long it took to set all of that up. It's delicate, and I also feel things, and I also don't know what's going on totally, so it takes a little bit longer to lay that all out and sort it out. I appreciate your grace with me for anything that I'm getting wrong. The reality is Israel should retaliate, and they should do something about the problem. I totally get it, and I say that as someone who hates war. But the conversation has been interesting. I was watching an interview today where a Western journalist who I think has been pretty sympathetic to the cause and plight of Palestine over the years was talking with a Palestinian journalist, and the Palestinian journalist is saying it's outrageous that Israel is attacking Gaza. And so the Western journalist says, okay, well, what would be a proportionate response? And the Palestinian journalist won't answer the question. And it goes on for like 5 minutes until it's just so frustrating that mercifully they end the interview. Clearly the woman from Palestine, the journalist there, wasn't going to suggest that anything would be a proportionate response. Well, that doesn't work either. My point is this. We're in that place right now where there is a degree of strong moral clarity up to an extent, and then when war and violence actually happens, it gets murky, and it's a little bit confusing for people. And understandably, most common people don't have a great proposal for exactly how this thing should be sorted out, because whatever sorting out is going to happen is clearly going to involve violence. And I think rightly, we don't like that. Why am I talking about all of this? Well, one, because it's going on and it's really strongly on my mind, and it's impossible in this moment as I'm recording it not to talk about this a little bit because of how much it feels like it echoes, even maybe is directly historically descended from the circumstances we're looking at in the book of Esther. That's just the reality of the deal. There is some age-old spirit of hatred toward the Jewish people that goes back to almost time immemorial, and certainly it was alive and well during the age of Haman and Xerxes and Esther. In Esther chapter 7, Esther finally gets the upper hand after Haman initiates violence against her and her people. Remember, she didn't do this. She didn't go looking for a fight. Haman went looking for a fight, and his imagined slight at the hands of Mordecai was enough for him to go absolutely nuclear. Well, Esther gets the upper hand, and she, looks like, has the opportunity to throttle back the violence and calm this thing down in Esther 7 and handle it more like a Saturday morning cartoon from my childhood where there's absolutely never any meaningful physical consequences, and be like, hey, all right, you get up off the couch before the king comes back in. You're going to give him an excuse to punish you. And look, Haman, I don't want that. Nobody wants that. I just want you to learn your lesson and stop trying to kill all the Jews. She could have done that, right? That would have been the nice ending where everybody claps at the end. But that is not what happens. It looks like in Esther chapter 7, when Esther alone is in a position to save Haman and be merciful, she just lays on the couch and keeps eating dinner. She doesn't say a word. She knows that the trap has been set and the trap has been sprung, and that Haman's own violence is about to boomerang on him, and she is completely content to let what has been set in motion play out for his ill fate. Critics over the years, biblical scholars who weren't even, religious people, Christians, Jews over the years have looked at that and said, oh, she shouldn't have done that. She should have throttled. The exemplary good moral thing to do would be to take mercy on your enemies like the heroes do in movies that are rated PG-13 and below. But she doesn't do that. And then we turn the page into what we were talking about yesterday, into Esther chapter 8. And now she's going to have another opportunity to throttle back the violence, to plead with Xerxes for some other solution, some kind of solution where both the people who have been activated, who seem absolutely eager to jump at the opportunity to go and kill all of the Jews, to work out some kind of deal where they still get to do their thing and live alongside the Jewish people, even though they were willing and ready and prepared and sharpening their blades to kill all the Jewish people. Maybe Esther could have throttled that back and come up with some kind of diplomatic solution to the situation. Maybe there's another kind of edict that could be issued. But critics of Esther here say she's not a good moral example because she is jumping at the opportunity that the initiation of violence on the part of Haman and his ilk has created for her to now flip that around and crush them while the iron is hot. Again, some people look at that and say, in these two occasions, Esther was in a position to come up with some merciful solution, and she didn't. She's not a good moral example. She shouldn't have handled the situation this way. Most people who think that from a place of relative comfort and not being threatened with genocide. But then other people, and I got to admit, this is my bias, this is how I read it, other people look at the whole of the book of Esther and say, well, she's never a moral example. Esther is never held out as an ideal peacetime wife who is exemplary of how good Jewish, Christian, God-following, God-honoring women and wives ought to behave themselves. At no point does Esther hold itself out as a personal behavioral morality tale about better individual conduct. I guess there are a few lessons that could be extracted, like don't be prideful and build 75-foot gallows to kill someone publicly because they didn't honor you properly when you walked by them in the street. But it doesn't look like the central point is this. The central point is to say, how did the celebration of Purim happen? And the central point would be so that people who celebrate and observe Purim down the road remember how God, who isn't even mentioned, delivers his people from what really, by all accounts, should have been extinction. If you run this scenario 10 more times, I think 9 out of those 10 more times, it's going to go Haman's way, assuming that these are just fluke circumstances. Now, if we assume that the God of all things is behind it and that he already determined to deliver his people and establish them through this exile period, then you could run it 1 billion times and it's going to work out the same way every time. But from a strictly secular probability reading of history, the deck is certainly stacked against Esther, Mordecai, and their people. And through stunning reversals, it doesn't work out that way. So what should Esther have done? Should she have been merciful in this situation? Or should she have finished what Saul started but was unwilling to finish himself? You can make of this morally whatever you would like to. Again, I think we're going to read that differently depending on how comfortable our lives are or what people group that we happen to be coming from. But the reality is that the text holds out what Mordecai and Esther are doing in defeating Haman and defeating their enemies who are hell-bent on their destruction. The text holds that out as a righting of a wrong, a justice that had been suspended and fumbled by Saul, who was positioned to carry out that justice and resolve that problem in the ancient world where things sound different and read different and we think about it differently. It looks like Esther and Mordecai are to be understood as doing the right thing in carrying out this justice and preserving their people forever, where Saul is held out as failing to do so for selfish personal reasons, and in doing so, flagrantly endangering all of his descendants by allowing the line of Agag and the spirit of Agag's hatred and determination to destroy all of the Jews to live on. Look, this is not easy material. We operate with some different moral categories and sensibilities at this moment in life than clearly they did in Persia, where somebody's getting wiped out. Something's going to happen. The ancient world was not a friendly place. And if you weren't very carefully positioned, if you didn't have walls, if you didn't have land, if you were nomadic and lacked power for too long a time, you're just lost to history. You go away, you're defeated, and you're gone. Maybe it's the same now, but we just sanitize it more and we don't notice it because we're more in the moment. And when we think about the ancient world, we think about it in larger swaths, more depersonalized swaths of history. But there's no getting around the fact that as I sit down and record this, what's on my mind is a global debate, not about whether some sort of response to the atrocities committed by Hamas makes sense on the part of Israel, but the debate is how should it be carried out? What role should mercy play? How far should they go in this thing? And right now the world watches with bated breath as we see how that's going to play out. Well, it looks like the citadel of Susa, or at least the court of Xerxes, which was once bewildered by an edict that was issued by Haman for the destruction of the Jewish people, is perhaps bewildered again and wondering how things are going to play out. Surely everyone in the citadel knew that now that Mordecai had the signet ring, and now that Esther was revealed as a Jew who was marked for execution by Haman and his ilk, surely they know that a response is coming. Surely the question is, what will the response look like and how far is it going to go? And we're going to learn more about that next time around and in the coming conversations. Look, I asked for your grace early on because I got so much time here and I've already gone way over. This is just going to be a long episode and I'm going to live with it. But there just is no neat, tidy, cute, funny way to talk about the parallels between these two things. But there's also no way not to talk about the parallels between this situation 2,500 years ago and what's unfolding as I record this. So thank you in advance for your grace toward me as I take the risk of putting a microphone in front of my face while the fog and chaos of war and misinformation and I believe very justified retaliation is unfolding in these moments. All right, I think that's plenty. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.